R-A-C-E, and took the E off of it. When they took the E off of racism, they then added ISM. That's where racism came from. R-A-C-I-S-M, racism. Racism means maintain the status quo that exists between the two bodies of people at that time. The two bodies of people in this country that were competing was whites and blacks. I don't know why that's so hard to get into black folks' head. And they think, well, we talk to us, it's for everybody. No, it wasn't. That's why recently in the federal page right here on this sheet that I'm holding up, you can't see it. See the line going up? See from here all the way up? Initially, there were only two groups in the country at that time. That was blacks and whites. That was the only two groups of any consequence, blacks and whites. Wow. And that time, Indians weren't even included.
What year is that from?
This was August 13, 201. This is what I was saying. They finally put it out, saying, here's what Dr. Anderson is saying. That time, you had two groups. You had these about 5.5 million black folk at that time, and you had the rest of whites. Indians weren't included in anything. Indians were not included. They were put into a special protected category. And so you didn't have any, when the Civil War ended, you only had something like about 4,000 his so-called Hispanics, they were called Mexicans and Chicanos at that time, in the entire United States. Only 4,000. Only 4,000. At that time, but you had, guess what? You had 5.5 million blacks. But when Hispanics said, we're going to close this power down, loop down, well, we're going to displace those black folk. We're going to displace them, as I told you in 1974, that by the year 2000, we're going to take black folks out. And so from 1866, the end of the Civil War, to the year 2000, guess what? The Hispanic population went up, Dr. Watkins, from 4,000 to over 100,000. Because they were pouring into the country then. They'd never been subjected into slavery. And what most people don't know is that Hispanics were the third greatest enslavers of black folk around the world. Everybody has enslaved black folk. Now, don't just pick on whites, Europeans. If you're gonna pick on white Europeans, you gotta get everybody. Because you see all these other groups in America are classified as whites. Blacks don't even know that. You got all these educated blacks with all these damn degrees, master's degrees, doctorate degrees in professional areas. And they don't even understand that this country right now, by federal registers, they classify anybody coming to this country except black folk as being whites. You know why? Because all the wealth that was mal-distributed in this country during slavery, it went under the logo of whiteness. Anything, that's why everybody wants to be white. They're branded. Hispanics on that sheet I just showed you. Hispanics over this end, Hispanics didn't come into were they included until way over here. And with Hispanic, in 1970, when I was with President Carter in the White House, that's when when the Hispanics ceased they ceased being Hispanics, and when they wanted to be called minorities. Because so that way they said, if black folk only got any benefits, we want to share in them. Even though we haven't suffered, we have never been enslaved. As a matter of fact, we were enslavers. We enslaved blacks. Blacks were the victims. But if they get anything, we want to get some of it too. So they begin to classify themselves as minorities. And guess what? You look at the front page of the Black History Reader. Same thing with Asians. Asians then started pouring into this country until about 1970. After that 1965 civil rights law was enacted, 1965, 1966. Our civil rights leaders sat there on their dead asses and let them classify all these immigrants as being equal to black folk. The greatest thing you can do is try to pretend that somehow equals, that people that are unequal are classified as equal. So they started classifying all these fabricated minorities, women, gays, Hispanics, Arabs, Asians, classifying them as minority or people of color, so they can be equal to black folks. That any bag of money comes out or any money goes on the counter has to be divvied up with them, split up and die with them. And Obama did the same thing with the Indian lawsuits that I'm opposed to. And I'm pushing my own version for the black Indians and the black freedmen. So anything goes on the table, they divide it up between those groups. Those groups have no link. Here's my point, and I'm gonna get off this subject. There's no link between fabricated minorities having a constitutional right. And the Supreme Court knew that. They knew that. But in 1965, when our civil rights leaders were meeting in Washington with Martin Luther King and John Lewis and all the rest of these civil rights leaders, when white women went down and took the 1964 act, they call an Opportunity Act, that President Johnson was proposing, they went in and said, look, don't make that thing strictly for black folk. You gotta put women on there. Because see, at that time, there's nothing in the Constitution talking about women and genders and all those things. Those things were added by white women who demanded, went to the court and say, put gender on and sex discrimination, gender discrimination. And discrimination is not racism. Every human being has to discriminate. You got to discriminate to make decisions. If I can't discriminate, I can't make a decision. If I can't be prejudiced based on what I've seen and loved, then I cannot make a decision. I cannot be biased